Let's cut through the noise. Negotiation is not an event. It's not a checkbox that you tick between procurement approval and legal sign-off. It's not something that you arrive at once the proposal has been submitted. And it's definitely not something that's reserved for the suits and the contracts crowd. If that's your current mindset, I'll tell you this. You're leaking value and you don't even know it. Here's the truth. Negotiation is not a step. It's not an event. It's the strategy. It's not a department. It's a discipline. It's not what you get to. It's what you lead with. Yet, here we are, decades into modern business evolution, still trapped in the shadow of 70s management theory, where negotiation is a thing that happens later, an event. Let me say it again. Sales is a subset of negotiation. Procurement, a tool within negotiation. Legal, a tactical extension of negotiation strategy. But most businesses still run this in reverse. That's why deals drag, contracts implode, and profit dies in the gray zone between what was said and what was signed. Imagine a multi-billion-dollar energy deal spiraling into chaos. The boardroom, midwinter, fluorescent light, flickering like a warning sign. The sales director, chest puff, handed over a final proposal, calling it ironclad. The client smiled politely, opened a folder 5 tabs deep, filled with alternate pricing scenarios, competitive positioning, and internal constraints that had never even been surfaced. You could feel the air suck out of the room because the other side had been negotiating right from the start. My client had just arrived. That's the real problem with the event mindset. It trains you to show up late, to walk in after power has already shifted, after framing has already been established, and after concessions have already been made without anyone even realizing it. You see, every email is a framing tool. Every meeting is a leverage point. Every silence is an information vacuum. And if you're not planning for that, by definition, you're reacting to it. I worked with a European logistics firm, a sharp team with a strong product. Yet most of their renewals that year, their revenue dipped. Why? Because they thought that negotiation began with a renewal proposal. Meanwhile, their clients had been building a narrative with procurement from Q2. By the time pricing hit the table in Q4, the frame was already set and their product wasn't seen as critical infrastructure anymore. Now it was a nice-to-have solution. Just like that, positioning flipped and margin went with it. Another client, a major telecoms company, lost a critical infrastructure deal simply because they viewed negotiation as a final and a defensive act. Procurement discovered too late that the vendor had already shaped internal expectations, already positioned themselves as indispensable. So by the time the negotiation started, the battle was already lost. I've seen this scenario play out in every industry: finance, healthcare, technology, retail, sports marketing. In each case, the teams thought that negotiation was a standalone event. Each time, the consequences were devastating: lost revenue, fractured relationships, and internal chaos. Consider a global tech giant known for its innovative products, but suffering repeated contract setbacks because they relied heavily on their sales team's charisma rather than coordinated negotiation strategy. So by the time procurement and legal entered the discussion, significant leverage had already been lost. Contracts were repeatedly delayed or even canceled, creating internal blame games and totally eroding their external credibility. Or take a leading financial institution whose procurement teams consistently reacted defensively to proposals from suppliers and vendors, never realizing that these suppliers had been shaping perceptions internally from the initial outreach. The institution routinely paid premium prices, believing they had no alternative, unaware that they had been negotiating at a disadvantage right from the outset. Now, imagine this. Imagine every person in your organization speaking one language: negotiation. Imagine your onboarding process didn't just train sales to present, it trained the teams to influence. Let's take this deeper. If you've been negotiating for years and feel like you've got it covered, I challenge you right now to audit your preparation. Not your slides, not your talking points. I'm talking about the actual thinking that you've done in advance using a tested framework. And if you can't point to something like the 4 pillars, vision, value, process, relationship, then I'll say it straight. You're relying on luck and charisma, not skill. And before you protest, but it's always worked for me, I need to ask, work by whose definition? You got the deal? Good for you. But did you leave 30% of the value on the table because you didn't properly prepare zone of possible agreement ranges? Did you fail to test their best alternative to a negotiated agreement early because you were too busy reacting instead of framing? Did you miss the emotional leverage because your process doesn't prioritize psychographic awareness? This is where we pierce the myth of the natural negotiator. Yes, some people are more persuasive, more socially fluent, but the elite are trained. They repeat frameworks. They rehearse live fire simulations. They weaponize structure under pressure. If you're not doing that, you're playing checkers on a chessboard. Let's talk tactics for a moment. Here are 3 that you're probably not using, but should be. Number 1, precondition the frame. Most of you walk into the negotiation trying to read the room. It's too late. You don't walk into a fight hoping to figure out if it's boxing or jiu-jitsu while the bell rings, right? You precondition the frame. That means shaping their expectations even before you get to the conversation, through your meeting agenda, your tone and emails, even your meeting title. Call it strategic collaboration discussion, options and risk alignment, not a contract review call. Language matters. Every word sets a frame. See, the best negotiators build a corridor for the other side's thinking before the first word is spoken. Number 2, use relational intelligence as a weapon, not a warm and fuzzy. Too many of you think that the relationship pillar means being liked. That's amateur hour. Relationship means reading the power dynamic. It means asking, who in this room feels safe? Who in this room feels time pressure? Who needs to show their boss that they extracted a win? You see, you're not managing relationships, you're managing perception. If you skip this step, you're just guessing at power cues. Thirdly, don't just know your BATNA, operationalize it. This is the most misunderstood piece of negotiation theory on the planet. Everyone's got a best alternative to a negotiated agreement, BATNA, written somewhere, but have you costed it in real numbers? Have you communicated it in calibrated language to your counterpart? Have you used it to craft your limits, tactics, and offer phasing? If not, your BATNA isn't a strategy. It's just a paragraph in your prep doc. Operational BATNA is the engine of power-based negotiation. And if you haven't tested that engine, don't act surprised when the other side pushes you around. Now, let's get uncomfortable for a moment. Some of you won't use this, not because you're lazy, but because you're trapped in the sunk cost fallacy. You see, you've already spent 15 years doing things your way. You've had some wins, you've built some habits, and you've gotten good. Probably at the wrong game, though. But sunk cost isn't strategy, it's stagnation. So here's the imperative, evolve. So let's get practical for a moment. Why don't you run a minimum of 2 simulation rounds before your next major deal? Not just role play. Use a custom renewal simulation. Use real roles, limited time, conflicting agendas, locking your aspiration base, your real base, and your zone of possible agreement on paper, with at least 3 internal stakeholders signing off. If you're solo, review it out loud. Why? Because pressure makes memory unreliable. You need anchor points. Preload your counterpart's likely strategy and tactics using the business negotiation preparation checklist. Do it like military intelligence. What's their most likely path of resistance? Where are they prone to stall? Practice the opening minute of your next deal almost like a script. Use vision-based framing. Something like this. This conversation is important because I believe that there's a path where both of us unlock X. But that requires some hard decisions and trade-offs. And I'm here for it if you are. You see, if you've been negotiating from instinct and winging it for many years, I have respect for you. You've survived. But we're not here to survive. We're here to dominate the complexity of high-stakes business conversations. You see, the 4 pillars aren't a theory. They're a weapons platform. Vision, value, process, relationship. And if you're not sharpening each of those, you're walking into a war zone with a butter knife. So what's it going to be? Are you ready to drop your ego and level up your game? Or are you going to cling on to your old habits just because they feel safe? Because here's the truth. The comfort of what's worked before is often the greatest enemy of what's possible next.